There's a house in Hartford, Connecticut that nobody talks about anymore. Not because people have forgotten what happened there, they haven't, but because what happened defies comfortable explanation. This is the story of what happened to the Gooden family. And why, after everything that's been written and investigated and theorized, we still don't really know what it means. Have you ever questioned whether something in your home moved on its own or if your mind just filled in the gaps? Tell me in the comments. Would you stay in that house or leave immediately? Jerry and Laura Gooden moved to Lindley Street in 1972 with their daughter Marcia, who was 8 years old at the time. Jerry worked as an electrician. Laura was a homemaker. They were, by every account, unremarkable in the best possible way. They kept their lawn neat. They waved to neighbors. They didn't cause trouble. Marcia was described by her teachers as bright but quiet. She did well in school. She had a few friends, though she seemed to prefer spending time alone, reading or drawing in her room. Her third-grade teacher noted that Marcia had an unusually vivid imagination, often writing elaborate stories about other worlds and invisible beings. This detail would later seem significant. At the time, it was simply noted as a quirk. The Goodens adopted a son, Samuel, in 1973. He was 9 years old, older than Marcia, which was unusual. He came from a troubled background. His biological parents had lost custody due to neglect. Social workers described Samuel as withdrawn and defensive, which was understandable given his early experiences. The adoption was meant to be a fresh start. Laura Gooden was particularly invested in making Samuel feel welcome, making it clear that he was loved, that this was his home now. For about a year, things seemed to work. Samuel adjusted to his new school. He and Marcia developed a tentative sibling relationship, not close, exactly, but functional. The family settled into routines. Then, in October 1974, something shifted. It started with small things. Objects that weren't where the Goodens remembered leaving them. A glass moved from the kitchen counter to the dining table. Car keys that appeared in strange places. Laura mentioned it to Jerry, who suggested she was simply forgetting. She wasn't convinced, but she let it go. Then the sounds began. Scratching noises in the walls, which Jerry initially attributed to mice or squirrels. He set traps. Nothing was ever caught. The scratching continued. Marcia began having nightmares. She'd wake up screaming about someone in her room, someone watching her. Laura would come to comfort her, and Marcia would insist that things in her room had moved while she slept. Stuffed animals rearranged. Books opened to different pages. Her drawings scattered across the floor. Jerry checked the windows and doors every night. Everything was always locked. In early November, the activity escalated. Furniture began moving. Not when anyone was looking directly at it, but when they turned away. You'd leave a chair at the table, turn around, and it would be 3 feet to the left. Drawers would be found open when they'd been closed moments before. Laura called their priest. He came to the house, blessed it with holy water, and prayed. The activity stopped for 2 days. Then it resumed, more intensely than before. On November 10, 1974, Jerry Gooden came home from work to find his wife sitting in the living room, pale and shaking. She told him that while he'd been gone, every single picture on the walls had simultaneously fallen to the floor. Not gradually, all at once, like someone had swept their arm across the walls. Samuel and Marcia had been at school when it happened. Laura had been alone. Jerry didn't know what to think. His wife wasn't prone to hysteria or exaggeration, but what she was describing seemed impossible. That night, Jerry stayed up late, sitting in the living room, watching. Around 2 in the morning, he heard it, a sound from upstairs. Not scratching this time. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps in the hallway. He went upstairs. The hallway was empty. Both children were asleep in their rooms. The next morning, Jerry called the police. Officer Joseph Tomek responded to the call. He expected to find a family dealing with a break-in or vandalism. Instead, the Goodens told him about objects moving on their own, unexplained sounds, and the overwhelming feeling that something was wrong in their house. Tomek was skeptical, naturally, but he agreed to come back that evening and observe. He brought another officer, Michael Lane, with him. What happened that night would change both officers' perspectives on what was possible. They arrived at 7 p.m. The family was gathered in the living room. Everything seemed normal at first. The officers sat down, notepads ready, expecting a quiet, uneventful evening that would confirm their suspicions that this was either a prank or a case of overactive imaginations. At 7:45, A lamp on the side table tipped over. Nobody was near it. Officer Lane got up to examine it. As he did, a book flew off the shelf across the room and struck the opposite wall. Both officers saw it. There was no explanation. No windows were open. No strings or wires. The book had simply launched itself off the shelf with considerable force. Officer Tomic later wrote in his report, "I observed an object move through the air with no apparent cause. I cannot explain what I witnessed." Over the next 3 hours, both officers documented multiple incidents. Picture frames falling, doors opening and closing, a chair that slid across the floor while everyone was standing several feet away from it, the sounds in the walls, which both men heard clearly. They also noticed something else. The activity seemed to intensify when Samuel or Marcia was in the room. Particularly Samuel. Over the following weeks, the Gooden house became something of a local phenomenon. More police officers came to observe and document. Neighbors gathered outside. A few reporters got wind of the story. Investigators noticed a clear pattern. The disturbances were strongest in the late afternoon and evening. They decreased significantly when the children were at school. And they were most intense when Samuel was present. This led to an uncomfortable hypothesis. Poltergeist activity, if that's what this was, is often associated with adolescents, particularly those experiencing emotional stress or trauma. Samuel fit that profile. He was an adopted child with a difficult background, approaching puberty, dealing with the normal anxieties of that age compounded by his earlier experiences. Some investigators began to suspect that Samuel was somehow unconsciously causing the disturbances, not through trickery, but through some form of psychokinetic energy that science didn't yet understand. Others believed Samuel was deliberately staging everything, that he'd found a way to create these effects to get attention or disrupt his adoptive family. A third group believed something else entirely was happening, that the house itself, or something in it, was genuinely haunted. Parapsychologists from a nearby university requested permission to study the phenomenon. The Goodens, exhausted and frightened, agreed. They wanted answers. The researchers set up cameras and recording equipment. They conducted extensive interviews with the family. They tried to rule out fraud. And that's when things took a darker turn. On November 24th, 2 weeks after the police first became involved, Marcia Gooden was found unconscious in her bedroom. She'd been there for approximately an hour before Laura discovered her. Marcia was rushed to the hospital. She was physically unharmed, no injuries, no signs of trauma. But she wouldn't wake up. Doctors ran tests. Everything came back normal. Her brain activity was normal. There was no medical reason for her unconscious state. She woke up 18 hours later. When asked what happened, Marcia said she didn't remember. She'd been in her room, and then nothing. Just darkness. But here's what disturbed the doctors. While Marcia was unconscious, her vital signs had been unusually stable. Too stable, almost. Her heartbeat never varied, staying at exactly 62 beats per minute for the entire 18 hours. Her breathing was perfectly rhythmic. It was as if her body had been placed in some kind of suspended state. The medical team had no explanation. After Marcia came home from the hospital, the activity in the house changed. It became more aggressive. Objects didn't just move, they broke. Windows cracked for no reason. Dishes shattered in the cupboards. And the sounds intensified. The scratching in the walls became pounding. Heavy, rhythmic pounding that would go on for hours. The family stopped sleeping. They moved from room to room, trying to escape the noise, the movement, the pervasive sense that they weren't alone. On December 2nd, Laura Gooden called the police again. This time, she was barely coherent. She said that something was trying to hurt them, that whatever was in the house had turned malevolent. When officers arrived, they found the family gathered in the living room. Samuel was rocking back and forth, his eyes unfocused. Marcia was silent, staring at the wall. Jerry and Laura looked like they hadn't slept in days. The decision was made to temporarily relocate the family to a hotel while investigators tried to figure out what was happening. With the family out of the house, a team of investigators conducted a thorough search. They were looking for evidence of fraud, hidden mechanisms, wires, anything that could explain the phenomena. They found something else instead. In the basement, behind a false wall that had been painted over and was nearly invisible, they discovered a small room. It was about 6 feet by 8 feet, with no windows. The walls were covered in strange markings, symbols that didn't correspond to any known language or religious tradition. In the center of the room was a chair, just a simple wooden chair, facing the wall. The investigators stood there for a long time, trying to understand what they were looking at. Who had built this room? When? For what purpose? They checked the property records. The house had been built in 1955 by a man named Richard Carver. He'd lived there alone until 1968, when he sold it to a family that lived there for 4 years before selling it to the Goodens. They tracked down Richard Carver. He was living in a nursing home, suffering from advanced dementia. When they showed him photos of the hidden room, he became agitated. He kept repeating the same phrase. It needed a door. I gave it a door. The investigators couldn't get anything more coherent from him. Whatever he'd meant, whatever he'd done in that house, the knowledge had disappeared into the fog of his deteriorating mind. The family who'd lived there between Carver and the Goodens was located. They were asked if they'd experienced anything unusual. The wife hesitated, then admitted they'd occasionally heard strange sounds, but they'd attributed it to old pipes and settling foundations. They'd never investigated. They'd never found the hidden room. The discovery of the room shifted the investigation. If this had been a simple case of adolescent psychokinetic energy or family stress manifesting as poltergeist activity, what did the room mean? Had Richard Carver been conducting some kind of ritual? Had he opened a door, as he'd cryptically suggested, to something that remained open? Or was the room simply a disturbing coincidence, and the real explanation still lay with the family dynamics? A psychologist who examined the family proposed a different theory. He suggested that Samuel, consciously or unconsciously, had discovered the hidden room at some point. The trauma of his early life combined with the unsettling nature of the room had triggered a psychological break. The poltergeist activity was either his unconscious mind manifesting psychokinetic phenomena or an elaborate performance created to express distress he couldn't articulate. But this theory didn't account for the multiple witnesses, police officers, investigators, neighbors, who'd seen objects move when Samuel wasn't touching them, when he was standing across the room, when he appeared as surprised as everyone else. It didn't explain Marcia's 18-hour unconscious state with perfectly stable vital signs. It didn't explain why the activity stopped completely after the family moved out for good. In late December 1974, the Gooden family made the decision not to return to the house on Lindley Street. Jerry broke the lease, absorbing the financial penalty. They moved to a different neighborhood, to a newer building with no history. The activity stopped immediately. In their new home, nothing unusual happened. No objects moved. No sounds in the walls. The children slept peacefully. The house on Lindley Street sat empty for 8 months. The landlord struggled to rent it. People had heard the stories. Finally, in August 1975, a young couple who didn't believe in ghosts moved in. They lasted 6 weeks. They reported the same phenomena: objects moving, sounds in the walls, the pervasive feeling that something was wrong. They broke their lease and left. The house was sold in 1976. The new owner was a developer who didn't care about the stories. He gutted the interior, removed the hidden room, and renovated everything. The house was then divided into apartments. No tenant in those apartments has ever reported unusual activity. Whatever was there seems to have been eliminated by the renovation. Or perhaps it simply left when the Goodens did. Jerry and Laura Gooden rarely spoke about what happened after they moved. When pressed by investigators or reporters, they maintained that something genuine had occurred in that house, something they couldn't explain. Samuel grew up to be a relatively normal adult. He became an accountant, married, had children. He's declined all requests for interviews about the Lindley Street case. The few times he's acknowledged it, he said simply that it happened, and he doesn't understand it any better now than he did then. Marcia became a librarian. She's been more willing to discuss the experience, giving a handful of interviews over the years. She maintains that something was present in that house, something that focused particularly on her and Samuel. She doesn't claim to know what it was: spirit, psychic energy, dimensional anomaly. She just knows it was real. The police officers who witnessed the activity have all, at various times, confirmed that they saw objects move with no apparent cause. Officer Tomac, before he died in 2003, gave one final interview where he said, "I know what I saw. I can't explain it, but it happened." The hidden room that Richard Carver built remains a mystery. Attempts to research what he might have been doing, what those symbols meant, what he thought he was accomplishing, have yielded nothing conclusive. The phrase "it needed a door" is all we have, and it raises more questions than it answers. The paranormal explanation is that the house was genuinely haunted, that Richard Carver had opened some kind of doorway, and that Samuel's presence as a troubled adolescent amplified whatever was there, that Marcia's unconscious state was caused by some kind of psychic attack, that we witnessed something science can't yet measure or explain. The truth is probably somewhere in the uncomfortable space between these explanations. Or perhaps it's something else entirely, something we don't have the language or framework to understand. Like and subscribe to my channel for more crime story.